Well, this is gay.
Welcome to About Time, a Doctor Who podcast. I'm Stephen, and usually I'm joined on the podcast by my boyfriend Ben. Today, however, to celebrate LGBT History Month, I'm joined by a very special guest, Emily Garside, the author of Gay Aliens and Queer Folk, to discuss the works of Russell T Davies. And quite frankly, it's about time. Hello listeners, happy February and a very happy LGBT History Month. We celebrate that in February in the UK. I know in other parts of the world it's different times, but yes, this is a very special month. And I'm very lucky today to be joined by Emily Garside, who is the author of Gay Aliens and Queer Folk, How Russell T Davies Changed TV. Emily is a queer, neurodiverse writer and passionate communicator about the value of LGBTQ+ stories in popular culture. So, hello, Emily. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
I feel very excited to have you here because I got your book for Christmas. I asked for it for Christmas because I saw it being promoted online and I was like, this is like the perfect book for me. Yeah. I've been a huge Russell fan for a long time. And so I've been reading it. I'm about halfway through it at the moment.
Great.
And loving it. We'll talk more. We'll give some details at the end about how people can find the book. But so you are obviously also a huge fan of Russell. And you've taken that to a sort of academic place. How did you first become aware of Russell and his work?
I think it's a mix for me of Doctor Who and Queer as Folk. So kind of, I always say I was like 2 years too young maybe for Queer as Folk when it first broadcast, but I was sort of culturally aware of it, watched it a couple of years later when I was in uni, really loved it, and then sort of didn't really delve into sort of more of his work at that point. But when then in like 2004, 2005, the new, as it was then, New Who came around, sort of connected the dots a little bit, watched that sort of first, or technically second season in my case, because I missed the first season live. In my defense, I lived in Canada and it didn't like come there at the same time. But yeah, when I sort of watched that, sort of connected the dots with, you know, who Russell was and started, you know, diving into his other work, realised there was a few other bits and pieces I'd sort of seen over the years, things like Bob and Rose, and a few other sort of things, particularly his kids' TV as well. I sort of had seen that as a child, but not known, obviously, as you wouldn't as a kid who it was. And then from there, just like very consistently was just interested in his back catalogue, sort of revisited Queer as Folk. It's a weird, as it is for a lot of people, I guess, dovetailing of things that, you know, those of us who were the right age for Queer as Folk also were the age of like 20-somethings then who got into the rebooted Doctor Who because it was kind of nostalgic but not quite, and then sort of like, yeah, it's the Queer as Folk guy, yeah, it's the TARDIS guy, it's very confusing but I like it. So yeah, those were sort of the two key ones. And just sort of felt from the very sort of early part of the new Doctor Who that I really connected with his style of writing and was sort of very interested in him as a creative, really. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, he's just a master of creating characters that you care about, isn't he?
Definitely, yeah. And I think that was a huge difference because I grew up sort of a big sci-fi fan in general. Like when everyone else was watching teen dramas, I was talking about this with some colleagues last week. They were all talking about how much they loved Dawson's Creek when they were teenagers. And I was like, I was watching Star Trek and X-Files when I was a teenager, like can't relate. But similarly, like as much as I grew up really loving a lot of like the 90s sci-fi and stuff, there's something very different about Russell's very character-driven approach to sci-fi. And like that's not to say that all sci-fi doesn't do character-driven very well, but I think there was just something very human about his sci-fi that like really drew a lot of people in at that time. And then actually once you start watching his other work, you kind of see that as very much his hallmark of like, he gives you very relatable, but often quite flawed characters, very real characters in some ways, even if they are alien beings and stuff. And I think that's a fascinating, consistent thing that he does, whatever he's writing about.
It is interesting, isn't it? Because he, even though it's something that is so far removed from our daily experience, he makes it something that's so relatable to all of us.
Yeah.
Like, I remember my grandpa once saying to me, like, because, you know, I've been a Doctor Who fan a long time, and I was saying to him about it, and he said he's never been interested in it because it's so far-fetched, and he said it couldn't ever happen, couldn't possibly happen. Why would I want to watch that? And I'm like, but, you know, that's what stories are there for, like, to, you know, they show you humanity in a different lens and stuff like that. Like,
yeah, exactly. And kind of, you know, good sci-fi of any kind as well is one that like feels relatable, even if it is literally set on a planet that looks nothing like ours. You know, I mentioned Star Trek before, but like early Star Trek, like that was kind of the thing as well, of like trying to make it parallel, you know, our own world, but looking at it through different lenses. I think Russell's Doctor Who as well does a lot of really good political commentary that like sometimes he's a bit heavy-handed with it, but like sometimes you have to be as well. Like Doctor Who is not a subtle show either, it never has been, but it's also kind of like, even when he's in an alien world, he's doing like political commentary that relates to, you know, whatever year he was writing in and stuff, or it's just like social commentary. And I think the way he frames the companions in his version of Doctor Who very well as like that lens for the viewer. And we find their perspective on all that, like, you know, like grandfather was saying, they're like the stuff that could never happen, but we feel like it could happen because we're seeing it through like Rose or Donna or Martha, whoever's eyes. And Russell does that, I think, incredibly well with his companions.
And so how did you come to the point where you ended up writing a book about Russell?
I know, this is the like, you know, how did you take it to the ridiculous nerdy degree of writing a book rather than just, you know, I don't know, shouting on the internet, which is probably what most fans do. Shouting at me on the internet now, probably. No, it was really interesting. So in 2021, I accidentally wrote a book on Schitt's Creek, which is, again, a very typical thing to do. I wrote a short book on Schitt's Creek during the pandemic from a lovely publisher called 404 Inc., who did this thing called Inklings. They're short, sort of 10,000 word books where you can do like a deepish dive on a topic that maybe, you know, no one would take a gamble on a full book on, or just doesn't need a full book. I proved them wrong and then wrote a longer book on Schitt's Creek, but that's another story. But I'd written this little short book on TV, and previous to this, I'd been sort of more of a theatre historian or queer theatre sort of writer. And University of Wales Press, who are based in Cardiff, had just started a spin-off trade imprint. So they were looking for slightly different angles of things. And their editor, Amy, read my Schitt's Creek book and just literally emailed me and said, oh, I read this Schitt's Creek book. I think your style's quite fitting with what we're trying to do. Would you like to pitch to us? So, you know, we went around the houses on a few different things, a few things that hopefully will never see the light of day because they're terrible ideas. A few things that might, and at least one that is seeing the light of day, hopefully in the near future. But we, in this conversation sort of that went from theatre to queer history to God knows what, I was like, I've always wanted to write on Russell T Davies. Like, is that a book? And she was like, yes, that's a book. So we went from there. The funny twist in this tale, so this obviously all takes time. Books take a long time. I was waiting for a contract for, a few weeks while it went through their processes. And the day I got their contract, I opened my email. I was like, great, we'll sign that. We'll get on with it then. That was the day that he announced he was going back to Doctor Who.
Wow.
And
yeah.
the sort of couple of hours of mild panic that created of me emailing the publisher, emailing Amy, being like, is this okay? Do we need to now like reframe the timeframes? Do we have to like, write it later so we can write about Doctor Who? Like, is this completely messing up the plan? And then as it happened then, like the book came out in September of last year, and obviously the specials were in November, the new series is next year. It's worked out brilliantly for me because suddenly everyone's talking about Russell. People like yourself want me to come and talk about him. Yeah. And it's not that he ever disappeared from sort of, our TV world, but it's been really interesting. When I pitched the book, I just thought it would be about someone who was a steadily really strong presence in our TV landscape, not the guy who's suddenly Mr. Doctor Who again, which is really incredible and kind of sort of put a different angle on what I was writing.
That's incredible. I mean, and he is such an important figure. Like, I do think books and reams need to be and will be written about him. Like, he will go down in history.
For sure. And like, he's just, he's quite an unstoppable force of writing, because even like since this book has come out, he's been back in Doctor Who. Nolly's been on like real TV after being on sort of ITVX for a bit. He produced the Men Up sort of series. He produced the Lenny Henry series that was on. Like, he's everywhere and like in some really significant pieces of TV, and all that while bringing Doctor Who back and the whole machinery of that. And I think even whenever he leaves Doctor Who the next time, whenever that might be, like, he's going to sort of still be producing, I think, quite iconic works for many years to come, hopefully. Yeah. And always interesting to think, what's he going to be up to next?
It's like you say, unstoppable. It feels like his brain never stops. Have you met him?
I have, after the book came out. So sort of another sort of a funny thing a friend of mine said to me about this was like, I had sort of opportunities to speak to him at other instances previously because I'm based in Cardiff. I used to see him a lot walking my dog back in the day on a Sunday morning when he was doing Doctor Who the first time in Cardiff Bay. I'd be walking the dog, he'd be out going to the shop or whatever, and we do the very British like nodding to each other because I think we saw each other often enough, but I never spoke to him.
Yeah.
I also, because I used to do a fair bit of journalism stuff, I'd been at like the Welsh BAFTAs when he was there, and he was the only person I was ever too starstruck to actually go and speak to because I was like, I just don't know what I'd say to you, so I won't bother. And then I met him at the Iris Prize Film Festival this year, just after the book had come out. I'd been to his Q&A during the day where we had heckled each other across a crowded cinema. The host, Lewis, had said he tried to quote my book, and then Russell had been like, oh yes, this woman's written a book, hasn't she? Blah, blah, blah. And I thought that was going to be it. Like he was just going to acknowledge it and we'd move on. No, he kept coming back to it throughout the whole talk and being things like, is that in the book? And like joking with me. But this was all across like a dark cinema, and I deliberately sat a bit further back because I was like, I don't want to be like staring in his face while he talks in case, because I was like, I don't know if he's Googled me, like I don't know if he knows what I look like, but I don't want to be like eyeballing him while he's trying to do his talk. So I was just a bit further back, and kind of he kept like heckling me across the thing, and we had a bit of banter and it was lovely. And I was like, oh well, that's that, you know, at least he seems good natured about the book, and that's good to know. And I didn't expect him to be at the closing night sort of ceremony of the Iris Prize, but he was, and I was there. So I sort of, a polite thing to do would be to go over and introduce myself. So I went over and introduced myself, and I was just like, oh, we heckled each other this morning, so I thought I'd better just say hello. Again, thought I was just going to say hello and, you know, go back to my drink or whatever. But he was absolutely lovely and was like, no, sit down, like, let's have a chat. And like, we genuinely had a lovely sort of 20-minute or so chat before the ceremony. And, you know, he was very, very gracious about the whole thing. And we both had the same conversation, or we both had the same thought of like, neither of us wanted to approach the other about the book because we were both very conscious of not intruding. So he was like, I didn't want to sort of impose myself on someone writing this book, but I also didn't want to look like I was unhappy or, you know, upset about it. And I was like, equally, I was like, I didn't want to, sort of pressure you to acknowledge the book, or also kind of, I deliberately, when I was writing it, I never asked for an interview, because he was also like, oh, don't tell me I turned down an interview, I'd feel terrible. And I was like, no. I deliberately didn't want to interview him for the book because I wanted to just have it be an outside, you know, my perspective. And I was like, equally, there's, you know, 1,001 quotes from Russell T Davies in the universe you could throw into the book, which I did. And I was like, I'd rather it be something separate from you, so you don't feel like you have to. And so we were sort of on the same page without knowing it, which was great. And then we just had a nice chat about like TV and theatre and stuff like that, which was just very, very lovely. And I was, you know, very, very relieved that he was so gracious about it, and kind of, you know, obviously it's, you know, spoiler alert, a largely positive book about his work in the celebration. But equally, you know, you don't want someone to think, oh God, people are writing these things about me, and I, you know, they don't want you writing about them. But no, he was genuinely lovely and kind of very sweet, and kind of, it's nice to see also someone of his sort of stature being so supportive of other sort of creatives, no matter what world they're in. And I sort of, you know, I've seen that from him in other contexts as well. And it's just nice to sort of feel that he's broadly supportive of people doing things. So yeah, that was a really nice sort of bonus to the process of writing it, was getting to chat to him sort of after it was all said and done, essentially.
Yeah, it sounds it. I can't imagine. Like, I did manage to meet him briefly once it was the Radio Times Festival, which they held at a green opposite Hampton Court Palace, which was at the time, like, I grew up very near Hampton Court, and I was still living at home. And I went to it because I had to, because it was like right on my doorstep. And so listened to him speak and be interviewed and everything, and loved it. And then he did a bit of a signing opportunity at the end, and I had my copy of The Writer's Tale, and I was, you know, taking it up to get it signed, and I was so like starstruck and nervous. And literally, it was such a like brief interaction, and so like where like I felt like there was nothing I could say that would actually sum up how I felt, and so I just said to him, I've been wanting to meet you for ages, and I said, and now you've come to me because you're right on my doorstep. And he was like, well, you've made no effort then, have you?
Just shuffled down the road. Oh, bless
but
him.
yeah, he's just a great man.
Yes, yeah, and seems very lovely. I have another friend of mine used to work at the BBC, and he kind of tells a tale of speaking to Russell in the canteen queue one day. But my friend had picked sort of, he really loved The Second Coming, the sort of Chris Eccleston Jesus one. Mm-hmm. And he just sort of very passionately went up to Russell and was like, I just have to say, I really love The Second Coming. And I think Russell was so taken aback, sort of Andy thinks, that it was someone, because this was around the sort of first Doctor Who time, that someone wasn't coming up to talk to him about Doctor Who. And he had a really enthusiastic conversation back then, because he was like, oh, great, I really love that. And they had a lovely sort of conversation. So I think, anecdotally, he seems very, open to chatting about his work and the things that he likes.
Yes.
Is,
it must be nice, like the ones that don't seem to get the sort of critical acclaim. To have people still, say that they noticed them and that they valued them.
Exactly, yeah. And kind of, that was part of, what I wanted to do in this book. And I didn't have enough space to sort of deep dive into everything he's done because he's so prolific. But it's nice to have stuff like, I've got chapters on like cucumber, banana, tofu, which, did really well awards wise and stuff like that, but it's a bit more sort of obscure than say Queer as Folk or It's a Sin. Like not as many people seem to know it in the sort of queer TV sort of list that he's done. And even talking about things like Bob and Rose, which I don't think got the attention it deserved at the time, all of those things. It's nice to be able to sort of highlight those alongside the big hitters like Doctor Who and Queer as Folk.
Yeah, I think cucumbers, it really makes me sad because every time he mentions it, he says, oh, that's the one everyone hated. Yeah. And it's like, no, I loved it.
I loved it. And it's probably one of the best things he's written to date. Like it's so well crafted and kind of and I think it says a lot of things and has a lot of difficult conversations that are really challenging to watch on TV, but it does them with typical sort of humour, and it's like both very sweet humour, but also like it's sometimes ridiculous and a bit daft, but it kind of, and it's so emotionally sort of impactful. That was one of my favourite things that I rewatched while writing the book, was just kind of getting a chance to revisit that, as emotional as it is as a series, but it's brilliantly written.
It is, yeah. So his first kind of big hit really was obviously Queer as Folk. For anyone who is listening and maybe isn't, I mean, I'm sure anyone listening is aware of it, but like, could you give us a brief like explanation of what the show is?
Yeah, it's a real snapshot of gay life in the late 90s, early 2000s. So it's sort of bridged 99 to sort of 2001. It's about a group of friends going out in Manchester's gay village, specifically focusing on Stuart and Vince, who are sort of best friends, two very different sort of men as well, like Stuart Alan Jones, because you have to give him his full name, is this, very effervescent, outgoing, very cool, like he's got a very cool job. No one really knows what he does, I don't think, but he's got a very cool job, very cool flat, always out, very beautiful guy, gets all the guys. And then like his best friend Vince is this like slightly nerdy, he's a Doctor Who fan, sweet guy who works in a supermarket, and they're like so different, but they've got this group of gay friends and they're going out to all the gay clubs on Canal Street in sort of the late 90s. And it really captures, that moment, a very particular moment in gay life, and I think in gay history now, which makes me feel very ancient. Not that I was quite old enough to be going out on Canal Street at the same time as Stuart and Vince, I should point out. I'm slightly younger than them. But it was such a watershed moment on TV as well, because not only the title, obviously Queer as Folk, very, confrontational to people who are opposing.
Was it originally intended to be called Queer as Fuck, wasn't it?
Yes, and even Channel 4 in the 90s went, that's maybe a bit too far. But it has really explicit sex scenes, like literally within minutes there is some very explicit sex in there, and it doesn't shy away from that. It doesn't shy away from maybe the darker side of sort of gay life at that time, things like drugs, things like death happens, and also just like negative things about the community a little bit, sort of, you know, the sort of shallowness that sort of maybe Stuart embodies, the inappropriate relationships that people have. All of these things are sort of woven into it while also giving this story of very human friendship, which again is something that, you know, Russell does so well. But it's that kind of thing of the first time really that queer life was foregrounded in a TV show. I mean, it was the first time really that any British show had done that. It's not just a token gay character in a soap who doesn't really have relationships or do anything. It was the first time some really explicit sex had been shown. And it's really interesting because we talk about the sex in Queer as Folk as if like straight TV hadn't been showing explicit sex for like decades at that point. But it was really confrontational. You know, the sponsors pulled out like 2 episodes in, which is hilarious because it's like, did you not read the title of the thing? Like, it wasn't like someone didn't read the brief clearly.
Yeah.
They're like, no. There were obviously, you know, complaints about it. But again, it kind of fit the brand and the way that Channel 4 was at that time. And they still are sort of one of the more edgy broadcasters in terms of commissioning. But that was very much, you know, their late night slots were very much about that. But I think it was also the first time that sort of as a community, there was a show people could talk about. You know, again, it wasn't just some random bloke on a soap. Oh, they might be gay, blah, blah, blah. Oh, there's been one kiss on Brookside, you know, this kind of thing. It was like, there's a whole show. And also people getting to sort of dissect how much of their life was reflected in this show and things. And it also became quite aspirational for younger queer people in that if you were currently living, you know, in a small town somewhere with your parents, you were looking at like the bright lights of Manchester and Canal Street and what Stuart and Vince were doing and going like, oh, one day that'll be me. And, you know, possibly when they got there, it wasn't quite as shiny as maybe the TV show made out.
People say about how it's not so much a depiction of real characters as more of a fantasy, like these are kind of archetype characters, and which is interesting.
And I think it's that thing of, you know, particularly like we all know a Stuart, we've all met a Stuart in our time. And it's, again, I think, you know, it's come under criticism for like a lack of nuance of characters, but it's exactly what you've just said. It was never meant to be that. And I think, interestingly, I've not watched all of the American version, but obviously the American version of it was adapted and it ran for several seasons, and then it also got rebooted. But if you've got loads more episodes and loads more characters in that, you can obviously make a much more nuanced version of gay life. But that is a different TV style, and that's a different TV style to what the very short form Channel 4 commission series in the UK does, to what a long form US series does. And it was, you know, Russell doesn't really write, he writes realism in that things are very real and very honest, but not stylistically. Like stylistically, he's often not very realistic. Even if, for a real contrast, we look at Casanova, the drama he did with David Tennant before he was in Doctor Who, like that's got elements of fantasy, like magical realism almost in it as a show. And it's that kind of thing of, you know, Queer as Folk is not a gritty documentary real life of queer life in Manchester in 1999. It's a slight fantasy. It's a slight, almost like cartoon-like version. I don't mean that as an like insult to it. It's this very stylized version of it, and it's meant to give you that snapshot, that, you know, look into some of it, but rather than being a, you know, in-depth gritty drama about it.
I think in your book you sort of compare it to Sex and the City as like a straight version.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, it's also similar to Sex and the City. It's supposed to be fun as well. Like it was all supposed to be, as much as there are the emotional moments and the sort of moments that make you think, it was supposed to be a fun time. Because don't forget as well, this was coming off the back of the worst years of the AIDS pandemic. You know, everything that had been written about gay men in the last decade had been very dark, very serious, very moralistic as well. And I think the idea of Queer as Folk was both to divorce from that a little bit and to see other elements of queer life, but also just to be joyous and to be like similar to the way, you know, also a lot of gay men, but a lot of straight women watch Sex and the City, being like this aspirational, fun, fluffy, silly thing in a way. It's that same thing of like, oh yeah, remember joy, remember like just going out and getting drunk and sleeping with random people or whatever, you know, whatever you enjoy. This idea of like, you know, we're not worrying too much about where Stuart gets his money from, because that's probably not a great thing, in the same way that we don't, you know, we probably shouldn't think too hard about like Carrie's financial situation in Sex and the City, because that's not the point. It's like, yeah, he's the cool guy with a massive apartment. Of course he is. Like, just go with it. Yeah. And I think that the important thing about Queer as Folk is that it was meant to be escapist in some ways as well.
Yes. Clearly just such a huge milestone for queer TV, and like can't be overstated that. I think Russell's talked a lot about how people are always coming up to him and saying about how, you know, maybe they were a teenager at the time that it came out, and they would have to sort of watch it in secret in their room, like because they didn't want their families to know. Like, yeah, I'm a bit like you. I'm slightly too young to have been in that. I think if it's 1999, I would have been 7 when it aired. So definitely too young.
Definitely not watching it.
but I did have a kind of similar experience in that, like, it was on 4OD, and I remember watching that. Like, when I did get to that age, I would watch that on my laptop. Like, you know, and it's a very universal experience, I think, for a lot of us.
I think so. And it's like, I think younger generations then found it on, you know, either VHS or DVD, like they, you know, you'd find it in, you know, HMV or whatever it would be, or later on, like you say, it was on the streaming services. And, you know, when you finally got that freedom of like having your own laptop or your own TV and being able to like discover things,
yes,
it's definitely one that people still discover today. And I think that's also really important, even if it is a different era entirely now compared to, you know, what teenagers would experience. But I think it's still important to be these are these, you know, these gay men.
Yeah, and people might be having similar experiences these days with It's a Sin and Cucumber.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think the really interesting thing, particularly with It's a Sin for me, is because my sort of background, my PhD was on responses to the AIDS pandemic through theatre, and I am very embedded in that world. I have a lot of friends who are very embedded in that world. I have a lot of friends, obviously, who are of the age or a little bit sort of younger, that was the period they sort of came of age in. So, but I forget that not everybody, as you do, not everyone's in my bubble. And equally, watching It's a Sin through the eyes of like younger people, sort of like Gen Z age or even younger, sort of hearing this story for the first time was so powerful and so interesting to kind of go, oh, that's what TV drama can do. It can really educate people and open people's eyes. Like, we're seeing it at the minute with the conversation about the Mr. Bates versus the Post Office TV drama, of people going, I missed this story entirely. It's a huge scandal, blah, blah, blah. The idea that, you know, if we tell a story through TV, people will either discover something they didn't know, they'll discover sort of something about themselves. And I think It's a Sin was so important for, one of my favourite phrases is saying, know your history. And that applies, you know, I say it to sort of queer audiences, but it applies to sort of anyone, obviously. And saying that about It's a Sin, kind of going, oh yeah, there are generations now who are kind of aware that AIDS happened, but obviously they're far enough removed now by like 20, 30 years that they don't have close ties to it. So watching It's a Sin and seeing it through the eyes of characters you then, you know, obviously grow to know and love over a course of a TV series makes it really real. Like, seeing it in front of you in a drama makes it really real. And even if you have only a passing knowledge of it, you know, you come across that series, and whether you watch it because you like a certain actor in it or you're just curious, it's a really important educational tool. And I think, you know, I hope also, because I just have a great fondness for Cucumber, that people are also finding that, you know, just through on-demand services and streaming, and kind of going, oh, this is what an experience of, you know, an older gay man in Henry's case, or this is what like gay life looked like at this point in time. Because again, that's what Russell's managed to do with a few of his sort of queer dramas, is provide us a snapshot of like what certain elements of queer life felt like at that time. And like, we forget that, you know, we have hundreds of snapshots of straight life because that's the mainstream, that's the main drama we get. And we only have a handful of writers like Russell doing that for sort of queer stories. So even if your life is not Henry and Cucumbers, for example, it's still important, I think, that we have dramas about men like Henry and Cucumber, because they will tell someone's story. And that's, you know, interesting, I think, because again, it's just being interested in other human life, essentially.
Yeah, it's interesting as well. If you look at Russell's kind of big gay dramas, he's got, you know, Queer as Folk from 2000, then about 10 years later you get Cucumber, then about 10 years later you get It's a Sin. It's like three quite different snapshots.
Yeah, and I think I almost hope that he sort of keeps up that pattern in a way. And I think you know, he talked recently in the Q&A I mentioned earlier, actually, he talked about that idea of like almost feeling like, yeah, you sort of keep telling the stories whenever you can to sort of keep that narrative out there. And I'm sort of, yeah, I'm intrigued as to sort of what's the next story he wants to tell. Is it about queer narrative his own age? Like, is he just going to keep sort of aging with those, which would be a really valid sort of way to tell the stories? Or is it that he'll do a bit more like Banana, which was the other sort of half of Cucumber, Banana, Tofu, and kind of go, oh, what are the sort of conversations that are happening with younger generations too, and how does that link to the older generation? I think that's probably what he'll do. He's also showing, I think, both in the way he talks in interviews and also what he's doing with Doctor Who so far, like a real engagement with sort of more complex queer identities that weren't shown in Queer as Folk, for example. And like, it gets a lot of flack for it just being about gay men, but it's kind of like, well, it was just designed to be a show about gay men, but also the language we had around queerness in 1999 is not the same as the language we have now. So, you know, I wonderfully heard Russell, you know, he mentions trans characters a lot, and he's already sort of showing his sort of, you know, willingness and motivation to showcase more trans actors and trans characters. I heard him talk about asexual representation in a speech, and like, as an asexual person myself, like, I never see that from other queer writers, never. And it's kind of like a gay cis white man of, you know, an older generation even than I is showing that nuance of kind of, oh, there are other identities that make up this community, and showing that awareness just in passing gives me a real hope that when he's then writing sort of, you know, maybe contemporary set work and like It's a Sin, like that's going to be in there now, because he is moving with the times and very aware of like, oh, right, we've got this, you know, and he did that in Banana as well. Again, this show gets overlooked all the time. But Banana, for anyone who doesn't know, it was the other half of the series Cucumber, and it was showing a younger generation of queer people. So even that, which is now what, maybe nearly 15 years ago, you know, they had a trans actress in it, which was one of the first on British TV, one of the first times a trans actor had played a trans role. And that was sort of very deliberate on Russell's part. It had a lot of nuances of different other queer identities in the younger generation, and it sort of showed, you know, the way that their sort of understanding of labels and identities was sort of shifting compared to the older generation. And I think that's something that, as a writer, he is quite aware of, and I would hope that in his future sort of queer writing that continues to be part of the narrative, which would be really interesting, I think, to see as that evolves over time.
I do love Banana, and I think maybe bringing that back or something along those lines, like nowadays, is, you know, there's so much more to tell, and it's the sort of series like, you know, Cucumber was designed to be like a one and done story, but Banana has the potential as a format, like you can tell so many things.
Yes, for sure. And it's kind of that thing of, it's more like that American Queer as Folk type model that I talked about earlier, where, you know, you could have just characters leaving, characters coming back, you know, it could be an ongoing sort of format. And also scope for, you know, showing that community growing and the interconnections and stuff. It's a really fun sort of idea in that sense. But something like that where you could have sort of multiple characters coming into your narrative, I think it'd be really interesting. And also, aside from Doctor Who, really, he's never done a longer running thing like that. So it's like sort of, it'd be really interesting if he ever did decide to do that with like a queer narrative, like a strictly queer sort of set of characters.
I'd like to talk about Bob and Rose as well, because that's another one that I really have a lot of affection for. And reading about it, like, it's such a shame that it was kind of, you know, the timing of it with 9/11 meant that basically nobody really saw it.
It's so sad.
It's such a good and interesting story. And again, another one that, like, from a 2024 lens now, it's like that could be explored a lot more. So the idea of a man who identifies as gay, and has always liked men, but then he finds himself falling in love with a woman, and what that means for his identity. Like, I think, again, like you say about not having the language all those years ago, I think that's another example of that, where he struggles with that.
Definitely. And so it's just such an interesting show, because I really, again, because I've done a lot of work on sort of older queer narratives, and particularly stuff from sort of the 80s and 90s. There's some stuff that gets criticised today for not showing like nuances of things or whatever. But sometimes I find myself arguing exactly that. We didn't have the same language 20, 30 years ago. So actually the stories are there. Just because we're not labeling them as certain things doesn't mean that the narrative's not there. And Bob and Rose is one for me that I just think, first of all, it's just a lovely idea. It's a lovely show and it's a lovely story. And it's very sweet and nice. But that idea of it is more complicated than it looks, in that we are talking about a man who was very secure in his identity. In Bob's character, he's like, I'm a gay man. I've lived as a gay man for like however many years of my life. Very happy. Thank you very much. And then, oh crap, I've fallen in love with a woman. And he's very happy in that relationship and very happy in what they have. But it causes, obviously, this internal conflict of like, well, who am I then? What does that mean? How do I identify? Is it important that I have a label? All of these things. And I think, obviously, today, if we were talking about it, we would maybe have him discover that he was pansexual, bisexual, maybe even demisexual, in that it's like, oh, it's just the person, actually. It's rather than a gender, an identity, a physicality, whatever it might be. And you'd have really complicated discussions about labels. And as much as those are important to people, in some ways it's easier when he doesn't have those labels, because he can wrestle with the idea and then come to the conclusion of like what's important. And that's somehow simpler in some ways, even if it's more complicated because there's no words for it.
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah,
it's so hard, but it's also a significant piece of drama in the sense of we can also point to the fact that these stories have always existed. There have always been Bobs of the world. Like, this has happened to real people all the time. And it's kind of a really reassuring thing for anyone who has gone through any shift in sort of what they thought their identity was to something else as well. And it's also just, again, it's very honest in a very human way of just saying, like, we can be so sure of ourselves, we can have all the education or the community that we want, but actually sometimes you don't know where like life and love and whatever is going to take you, and you'll end up falling for someone. And it's a very lovely thing, again, from Russell's sort of storytelling point of view, where he just kind of goes, let's just let people love each other. And actually that's a very like, that's kind of what we preach as a queer community, but sometimes we don't practice it very well, in that we're like, just let people love who they want. Love is love, all of those things. But then we get very caught up in like what groups you're putting people in or what categories you're putting people in. And actually, we should probably more just be that's fine. He now loves this person, do that and blah, blah. But I think it shows a little bit of what the pressure we put on the community as well, while trying to be inclusive. But they're both brilliant actors in it, and they're both in the casting of that is very clever, in that you don't expect Alan Davies to be playing this complex, queer man. And partly that's part of the fact of, in the late 90s, early 2000s as it was very difficult to find queer actors, queer actors for things. But also because of the nature of the story, actually having the like friendly face of, as he would have been at that time, Jonathan Creek, later QI, playing this man with a very complicated sexuality, made it quite accessible to, in that case, an ITV audience on like a Sunday night or whenever it was broadcast, because it's like, oh, watch that nice man, Alan Davies. Oh, this is not me. It's not Queer as Folk, but it's not what we expected. And as much as it's a whole complicated conversation about who gets to play gay characters, I think at the time, again, that worked in their favour, because you got people to watch it because they were going to watch that nice man off of Jonathan Creek, because they'd watch him in anything because they liked him, type thing. Yeah. But also he, there are other actors who could have played the role, but because he's very much a man next door, everyday bloke you'd see in your office type thing, he's not Stuart Alan Jones on Canal Street. It's a different side of that sort of sexuality
100%,
story.
Yeah. I can imagine, straight audiences maybe accidentally tuning into Queer as Folk and being, really, really alienated. And then like you say, they could watch Bob and Rose and be actually very like, well, this is very much more relatable.
Exactly, yeah. And it's that thing of, not every show is for every audience, and that's fine. That's why we have different shows. Yeah. And it's that thing of, in having a really sort of accessible way into that story, actually maybe that changed a few people's minds. And also even things like seeing a mother on TV fighting for gay rights for her son, actually if you were that mother in that position, that has a real power, because you kind of go, oh, if she's doing that, maybe I could either be more supportive, or maybe I could chain myself to a bus. I don't know. Like, it's that kind of thing of, it's finding relatable characters in TV. And it's, I think Russell's done that quite well across his queer dramas, more
Yes.
broadly, of kind of going, there are different access points for different people, and like not everyone is ready for Queer as Folk, but you might be ready for Bob and Rose. You know, it's that kind of thing.
Yeah. This conversation is just making me really want to have a massive binge and rewatch all his dramas like back to back, because they're just so good. So the elephant in the room then, and the reason that we do this podcast is Doctor Who, and Russell brought that back obviously in 2005. And he made it queerer than it had ever been before in some ways. But I'm actually really interested by a point you made in the book about seeing the Doctor as a queer character. I found that really interesting because you mentioned about the parallels with coming from Gallifrey and always feeling like an outsider and feeling that they had to kind of escape from that place to go and find themselves. And
I think it's it's something that's always obviously been slightly woven into Who even pre-Russell. The idea, that the Doctor is an outcast. You know, that's very much always been a thread, whether they did it deliberately as a bit of a rebel, or whether it's being outcast by the other Time Lords, whether it's through being abandoned, all of the things. And it's the sense of they come to another planet, Earth mostly, looking for friends or family or a place to fit in. And it's this beautiful sort of allegory in a way of like this being who is different in some way. In this case, they're a Time Lord, they're an alien, they're however many 100 years old at different points. And they are looking and eventually find the place they fit in a place that isn't home, that isn't their own blood family. It's humans who are a different species in that case. Their best friends in the world become the humans that they pick up along the way, in a very queer found family sort of way. And they're all a real mismatch of people. And particularly in Russell's era, I think this comes into play of like the companions are often outcasts or different in themselves, like they don't fit in either. And the Doctor sort of takes them into the TARDIS and sort of they all become sort of, connected. They all weirdly get on as well. And I know there's that really in sort of the Jodie Whittaker series, there's that thing where they all have the weird support group for companions, which I found, that cracked me up. I thought it was great. But that idea that actually if you put a bunch of the companions in a room together, they would get on and they would form friendships independently, because it is this weird, interconnected, found family that's just such a queer notion. And kind of the Doctor's always doesn't quite fit in with anybody. They're their own being of slight weirdness and like against the grain and all of this. And that's just a very queer notion of, not just you don't fit in with your own family, but also you're just like doing your own thing. And kind of the Doctor mostly just embraces that and like rolls with it. And I think that's such a queer idea and such a queer character, and it's great.
Yes. I really like this idea of a friend of the Doctor, a bit like friend of Dorothy.
It's like we'll start a new metaphor.
Because there is, there's undeniably such a crossover with Doctor Who fandom and the queer community. Like,
definitely.
And I've often wondered what it is about the show that attracts queer people. And I think, like you said, it's that, people who are outcasts, but they're sort of welcomed into a place, and they have this opportunity to sort of escape in the TARDIS, to escape their real lives. It's very cathartic, I think.
Yeah, and I think that idea of both being able to like literally hop in a TARDIS and go somewhere else where it might be better, is a very sort of queer, I think particularly for younger queer viewers, like, I could escape, I could literally run away with the Doctor. And it's like a different sort of version of, running away to London or San Francisco or like to some queer community. But it's also the fact that the Doctor just accepts everybody for who they are. Like, the Doctor will just rock up on an alien planet and be like, cool, hi, nice to meet you. Yeah, you seem cool as long as you're not trying to like murder anyone or anything.
Yeah, exactly.
And he just takes everyone at face value and is very accepting immediately, and also sees the best in people. Like, I love with Chris Eccleston's Doctor, he's just very enthusiastic, despite being like the most dour Doctor in some ways, because he's Chris Eccleston and that's his vibe. But he's just like, brilliant, everything's brilliant. And he's just very excited by humans and kind of, very engaged with just being excited about whatever creature that he's sort of come. And that's what Russell's Doctor Who came back with, that energy of like, aren't humans brilliant? Yeah, you're brilliant. Let's go do a thing. And just kind of, being very open-minded. The second episode of Eccleston's one where they go to like, there's all the aliens in a room, and it's a bit like the cantina scene in Star Wars and stuff. And Rose is just like, what the hell? Because like there's a load of aliens in the room, and the Doctor's just like, what do you mean? They're great. They're like, this dude's great for this reason, and this dude's great for that reason. And it's just very, everything's just embraced, and kind of until they prove themselves to be doing something bad, the Doctor will never see the bad in anyone. Sometimes to the detriment of whatever's happening, but mostly, or even stuff like, when the Ood rock up, and obviously they look really weird because they're an Ood, and the Doctor's just like, cool, it's an Ood, like, don't care, like, you've got weird tentacle things coming down, don't care, how are you, Mr. Ood? Like, it's that kind of, to a ridiculous level because it's sci-fi, but it is also very much based on this idea of acceptance, and kind of, that's why as well there's no real commentary on Rose in the specials, who is a trans character, because like if the Doctor's not going to blink at an Ood or whatever other alien creature they've come across, a person who's trans is in the nicest possible way no big deal at all to the Doctor, because it's like, oh, okay, you're trans, like almost like a so what way, in a good way of just like, okay, cool, right, what's next? Oh, let's get this alien thing that's causing problems out, like it's not a thing that factors into the Doctor's thinking. And I think that's particularly for the young audiences who are watching Doctor Who a really good message to sort of maintain across it, is just that everybody is welcome in the TARDIS as long as you're a good person. And I think that is one of the strengths, particularly with Russell bringing more queerness into Doctor Who as well, which is a lovely thing.
The other thing sort of linked to Doctor Who then is Russell creating Torchwood in 2006, which obviously also did quite a lot for queer representation at the time. Yeah,
definitely. Like the classic label that people gave them were like the chaos bisexuals, which I don't think there's a better label that you could give Torchwood. And like Torchwood's such an interesting one because, yes, I mean, there are criticisms we could level at it in terms of the sci-fi, in terms of the representation, all of those things. But like, it's quite an old show now. And even if you compare it to stuff that was on at the time, and I feel bad because Supernatural is always my go-to reference for this, but frankly it deserves it at this point. Like something like Supernatural that consistently, I think it's fair to say, queer baited its viewers for about 18 seasons. I don't know how many seasons of Supernatural there are now. Far too many is probably the short answer. But that had elements of, we're going to do a bit of queerness. No, we're not. And like, there are plenty of other shows we could use an example of that. Whereas Torchwood came out the gate and was like, right, we've got Captain Jack, we've got, every other staff member in this secret base is going to have some kind of like bisexual tendencies at some point in an episode. Yeah. The first episode was about an alien that like used sex as a weapon or something ridiculous. Like, it's been 20 years and I don't know. I feel bad for that actress. She's a very well-known, accomplished Welsh actress, and I still can't not think of her as the Torchwood sex alien, and I'm really sorry for that because she will forever be that in my mind. But it had very sex positive, again, before we really used that phrase a lot, but it was a very sex positive show. Nobody was slut shamed, particularly. If they were, it was in very good natured, like within the context of the show. Nobody, I always say, nobody was sort of shaming Jack for being Jack. They were just rolling their eyes at Jack for being Jack in the way that you would if you had to work with Captain Jack Harkness. Yeah. You'd just be like, what is he doing now? Like, oh my God, oh right, he's having sex up in the conservatory or whatever the thing it was in there. We're trying to work. Like, it would be that kind of thing. It's not, oh, you like naughty man, you've had sex with like 5 people this week or whatever it was. It was just like, oh, can you not while we're trying to work? Like, that's the difference. Yeah. It was also, again, it was a fun show. Like, it never said that it was doing things seriously. I think that was really apparent from the Sex Alien episode 1 type thing. It was never meant to be taken seriously, but that doesn't mean that it didn't have sort of serious points people could take home, which, as much as we're not allowed to call it Doctor Who for grown-ups, as Russell often got told off for himself, that's kind of a Doctor Who ethos of like, it's meant to be a bit daft, but also it doesn't mean you can't have serious points within it. I think Torchwood did that incredibly well for much of its run. And it had a really strong impact on the fandom because I think it hit a key point where the fans of Doctor Who, the reboot, had just grown up into like their late teens and 20s, and having a queer-led show at that point was really formative for a lot of people. I know a lot of those people who had it came into their lives at the right time. It wasn't that they'd grown out of Doctor Who, because I would argue you never grow out of Doctor Who, but it was like, oh, it's a nice, more sort of adult in every sense show that really appealed to the queer fandom of it, and a lot of people found a lot of things in it. I had a lovely conversation at one of my book events where someone said they've still never felt more seen than in the character of Toshiko. And I was like, that's such a powerful thing of just going, this woman, when I was like, they were like, say 19 or 20, really spoke to them and was the first time they'd seen themselves on TV and haven't since. It's like, that's a lovely thing. I think a lot of people felt very seen by Yanto. Like, I really identified to Yanto in some way, like the nerdy coffee boy, sweet sort of, overlooked person in life, who happens to fall in love with, this person at this time, and it changes their perspective on who they are. Great, lovely, lovely story. Like, obviously there were some things that went a bit wrong later in the running of Torch that made the fandom maybe less, forgiving of what went down. But I think particularly the first two series of Torchwood meant a lot to a lot of queer fans.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
Again, we can look at it through 2024 eyes and go, we probably wouldn't do that now. We wouldn't say it like that, or we do it differently. But it was better than a lot of particularly sci-fi was offering at the time. And it became, again, I like to think of these things as like what they meant to people at the time and how formative they were. And kind of, it meant a lot to a lot of people. And I think that's a lovely thing, whether or not it now stands up to our critical viewing. I think we have to look at how important it was.
It was definitely a very important show for me as well. Like, I think I was 14 when the first series came out, so probably slightly too young, but I did watch it. I remember my dad said he'd watch each episode first to sort of check if it was suitable for me, and he did that with the first episode, and then was like, okay, you can watch it. And then after that, I was just like, I just carried on and watched it without his approval because I was already hooked. But also I wanted to share as well something I'm sure a lot of queer people can relate to. My grandpa was reading the paper and there was something in it about Torchwood, and he hadn't heard about it. So he was asking, what's this Torchwood all about? And before I could say anything, my uncle was like, well, Russell T Davies is a gayer, and John Barrowman, who's the leader of Torchwood, is also a gayer, and it's basically their show where they can advertise their practices. And I was sitting there as not out at that point as a gay person, and it was really not very comfortable. But the fact is that, like, this show was being made, and it was something that was sort of for people like me, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that.
Yeah, and it's that thing of, it was very much a moment of kind of going, we see you as the sort of the queer Doctor Who fans, and we sort of feeling very seen and heard by it, in that sense of kind of, yes, it was, an outlandish, slightly ridiculous show, but it was that thing of going, no, there is something out there that is showing people who felt like yourself, and kind of just being allowed to do that on like mainstream sort of BBC at the time as well was a really, again, a shift from, it wasn't, it was a later night show than Doctor Who, but it wasn't like late night Channel 4. It was sort of something in between, which I think, again, was a really important thing of like, it was on at like, 9 o'clock on BBC 3 or whatever. And it's kind of, it was part of the Who machine. So it got a lot of attention. Yeah. And again, putting that, whether people were going to respond in that way or not, in people's sort of living rooms was still a really important thing.
Yeah.
Like, it's going to exist. You're going to have to deal with it.
And it's a generational thing as well, because like, I do remember, peers of mine at school were watching it as well. Like straight people in my class would come in and talk to me about it because they'd watched it. So it was kind of nice to know that, okay, maybe older generations don't get it, but younger generations are starting to.
Exactly. Yeah. And kind of have that thing of, even if as a younger person, they hadn't been exposed to much sort of queerness at that point, if it's on a like fun TV show that everyone's talking about, then, they're going to watch it. And maybe it is that thing to think, oh, if you think that Captain Jack's okay and he's this like omnisexual, queer person, oh, maybe that kid in your school who turns out to be gay or bi, oh, maybe you'll be cool with them. And I think it is that sort of very gradual kind of you know, again, there wasn't loads of queer TV at that point to choose from. And it was that thing of, well, if you're slowly exposing people to those characters that they just like, and then they happen to also be queer, then that's going to make people hopefully more tolerant or more open-minded, you know, when they meet a real life person who's queer, which is, again, one of the aims, I think, of some queer TV, is just like, let's just tell the stories and hope that it sort of helps, you know, educate people a little bit as well.
Yeah, I definitely think it did that. So in terms of the future then, you said about being interested to see what stories Russell wants to tell going forward.
Yeah.
What do you think? I mean, what would you really like to see from him?
I think, firstly, in Doctor Who, I think what I want, and what I think we're probably going to get, is more what I call incidental queer representation. So it'll be things like there will just be more characters who form more of the background of Doctor Who happen to have a queer identity, in the same way, you know, we had like, you know, some same-sex couples previously in Doctor Who, like be in one episode or two episodes, something like that. And I think we'll see more of that, but I think we'll see it more deliberately embracing a bunch of different sort of identities as well. So I definitely think, obviously, we're going to see more from sort of trans characters in Rose's character, at least, because that's been confirmed now. But I think we'll just see more nuance in that that's more up to date with sort of, you know, the labels and stuff we use now. I think that's a beautiful thing. We'll hopefully see a wonderfully sort of queer-coded Doctor in Ncuti for a number of years to come, which I look forward to. And I just kind of, yeah, I hope that he has that lovely, like, rebellious streak that he has, particularly in Doctor Who, actually, where he's like, I'm gonna do it my way, and we're gonna have like a queer alien character, and we're just, you know, we're gonna roll with it. And then I hope that it's sort of two things I hope from his sort of broader writing. And one is that he seems to be using the power of sort of Doctor Who and his stature to platform other people, to help in his producing work, particularly now, because he's moved into a lot of that. He's using that to elevate other stories. And I think, and I hope that's sort of his longer term plan as well, is if he's working in that side of things, he's platforming those stories. He's moving, you know, either up and coming sort of people or just other minority voices and minority stories. I think that's a really sort of positive thing. And he kind of seems to be using his power for good in that way, which is a great thing. And then I think it took him so long to get It's a Sin made, but I think in the next couple of years, once Doctor Who settles in, and whether he stays, you know, however long he stays, you know, in that, I think he'll probably turn his attention back to another queer drama, because I think he's done a few in between, you know, like Years and Years, like Nolly, that are just interesting stories that have obviously grabbed his attention for whatever reason. But I think we'll probably see him move on to the next big queer story, because, as we said, he seems to have this 10-year or so cycle of like, oh, I'm going to do the big one. And I think it will be I kind of see it as a bit of a state of the nation, like, where are we now type thing, because we've had such a fraught number of years as a queer community. And I think even as someone who existed in a fairly, you know, privileged state as a like cis, white, middle-class, successful man, he can see the trauma and the turmoil in the community. And I think he's not going to be able to resist addressing that through drama.
Yeah.
And I kind of hope, if it takes a couple of years to be made or a few years to be made, it's almost one that looks at it retrospectively, and maybe it comes from more of a place of hope, or it's one that will tell us like a where are we now type thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think there's a real power in what he's done so far with Queer as Folk and Cucumber particularly, and then looking back with It's a Sin. But I think he's going to start looking at the present and looking forward. Yes. And I would really love another big queer drama from him that's kind of this is the community as we see it in this moment, and ask some big questions about that, and some difficult questions, because I think actually through drama he could be the one to also interrogate sort of some of the more difficult elements of the community, and like how we include and exclude certain groups or privilege certain groups and stuff like that. And I'd be really interested to see how he has that conversation in, like, I don't know, 2025, 2026, whenever this thing that I've decided in my head he's going to make gets made. Put me on the commissioning board of the BBC or whatever, and we'll sort it out somewhere. I was going to say, so interestingly, he's never worked in film, like, particularly, but maybe like a TV film something would be interesting as well, from him to work in like a longer form drama in that sense. I don't know, because he loves TV so much that he never go that way, but I'd be interested to see him experiment, or to go the other way and do some short form, like I know he did it with sort of Banana to a degree, but like 30-minute sort of
yes.
comedy drama segments. I think he'd be really good at that. And I think it'd be really interesting to see him do that instead of like the hour-long dramas as well, in terms of playing with the form that he usually works with. But yeah.
I've always thought I'd really like to see him write for theatre.
Yes. Yeah.
It'd be amazing to go and see a play at the National or something written by him.
Yeah. And I think he's got that real, again, the humanity to his writing.
Exactly, yeah.
That would make for a really, you know, you could do a really intimate sort of character-driven drama that I think would be absolutely fascinating. And I think what he'd also do, which would be really interesting with that, is because he likes to platform Welsh voices as well, sort of a Welsh collaboration big drama would be a really fun one to see him do as well, for Welsh theatre. Maybe that's what we need for Welsh theatre as well, like Russell T Davies dropping in with a massive Welsh play.
Yeah. It'd
be very cool. How good you could have Michael Sheen and David Tennant. They come as a package deal now, I hear. So Michael Sheen loves a bit of Welsh drama. He's in Nye at the National and at the WMC soon. Get them two as a package deal, and we'll sort something out.
Perfect.
There we go. I've solved the theatrical question for a few years' time as well with that.
Well, whatever Russell ends up doing next, I know it will be incredible, and I'll certainly be watching.
Definitely. Me too.
Yeah, thank you, Emily, so much for having this conversation with me. It's been a pleasure. Do you want to tell listeners where they can order your book?
Yeah, for sure. So it's called Gay Aliens and Queer Folks, How Russell T Davies Changed TV, and it's published by Calon Books, and it's available either directly from Calon's website or from all good book retailers, both in the UK and North America now, I believe. Amazing.
Where can people find you online?
You can find me on all social media platforms pretty much under my name, so Emily Garside, and particularly on Twitter. I refuse to call it the new name, and Instagram under my name, and always happy to chat books and queerness with people on there as well.
Amazing. And are you working on any projects at the moment that you can tell us about?
Yeah, so with my same publisher, with Calon, I'm working on a book currently called Queer Icons of Wales, which is basically just a big old book of really cool queer people from Wales and the cool stuff they've done, which has been really fun to write because it's like actually a really jolly thing being like, these people did amazing things. Isn't that great? And then I've just, actually, no, it's out next week when we're recording this, a longer book on Schitt's Creek, published by Applause Book, based in North America. And that's a deeper dive into all things Schitt's Creek, fittingly on the 9th anniversary of that show being broadcast, which was just a fun coincidence because I have no control over publication date, but I'll roll with it. So yeah, if you like Schitt's Creek and again like a deep dive into TV, that one was really fun to write as well and really lovely to sort of dive into. So yeah, that's currently what I'm working on.
Amazing, thank you.
Thank you so much.
So listeners, once again, a very happy LGBT History Month, and I'm going to finish by saying, stay here, stay queer, stay fantastic.
Awesome.
Awesome.